Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Freunde, ich begrüße alle, die zuschauen aus dem Lyrik-Kabinett. Die Stadt der Äpfel, Gedichte von Luljeta Lleshanaku, das ist der 48. Band in der Edition Lyrik-Kabinett bei Hanser. Es ist der erste aus dem Albanischen übersetzt und wir sind wirklich sehr, sehr glücklich über dieses Buch. Wir hätten wahnsinnig gerne Luljeta Lleshanaku heute hier im Lyrik-Kabinett persönlich getroffen. Das war auch mehrfach geplant. Daher rufe ich ihr von dieser Stelle aus zu, liebe Luljeta. Irgendwann wird es eine Gelegenheit geben und dann feiern wir noch einmal gemeinsam das Erscheinen dieses Buches. Seine Vorstellung wollten wir jetzt nicht weiter hinauszögern, deswegen sehen wir uns heute noch einmal in dieser Zoom-Veranstaltung. Die Dichterin spricht gleich mit ihrer Übersetzerin, mit Andrea Grill, die ich ebenso herzlich in Wien begrüße. Luljeta Lleshanaku ist, das darf man wirklich sagen, eine europäische Dichterin von Rang. Das weiß man spätestens mit Blick auf dieses Buch, der man Leserinnen und Leser in der ganzen Welt wünscht. Jeder wird dem zustimmen, wenn er ihre Gedichte über die großen Themen in unser aller Leben liest, über Leben, Tod, Krankheit, Kindheit. Keinen wird zugleich der Aufschein ihrer ganz besonderen Geschichte unberührt lassen, als Tochter einer im kommunistischen Albanien verfolgten, ja terrorisierten Familie. Kleine wahrgenommene Momente, Details, Verschiebungen, Gespräche, Erinnerungen sind es, die ganz große, tief erfahrene und durch ihr eigenes Leben beglaubigte Geschichte erzählen können. Andrea Grill wird uns die Dichterin gleich vorstellen. Sie hat ein schönes, sehr schönes Nachwort zu diesem Band geschrieben, das selbst schon ganz literarisch ist. Sie ist selbst eine Dichterin, veröffentlichte mehrere Bände, war in Klagenfurt zu Gast und sie war mit einem Roman für den Deutschen Buchpreis nominiert. Andrea Grill hat nicht nur Sprachen und Sprachwissenschaften studiert, sondern auch Biologie. Promoviert wurde sie mit einer Arbeit über die Evolution der Schmetterlinge auf Sardinien. Und sie übersetzt aus dem Albanischen. Von Luljeta Lleshanaku hat sie bereits einen Band ins Deutsche übersetzt. Der ist 2010 in der Edition Korrespondenzen bei Reto Ziegler erschienen und hat der Rezeption Luljeta Lleshanakus im deutschsprachigen Raum erste Wege geebnet. Ich danke Ihnen beiden sehr und ich freue mich auf die Lesung und auf das Gespräch.
Guten Abend. Ich habe das Vergnügen, Ihnen die Dichterin Luljeta Lleshanaku vorzustellen und mit ihr auch eine der wenigen bekannten Sprachen, auch eine der weniger bekannten Sprachen Europas, das Albanische. Luljeta lebt in Tirana und sie spricht mit mir heute auch von Tirana aus. In Tirana leitet sie das Institut für die Aufarbeitung des kommunistischen Genozids in Albanien. Sie übersetzt auch aus dem Amerikanischen, zum Beispiel John Ashbery. Ihren ersten Gedichtband, Die Augen der Schlafwandlerin, veröffentlichte sie 1993. Das war 2 Jahre nach Ende der kommunistischen Diktatur in Albanien, während derer ihr das Publizieren unmöglich gemacht wurde. Seither sind 8 Bände erschienen. Einige davon sind in andere Sprachen übersetzt, allen voran das Englische. Im angelsächsischen Raum ist Luljeta Lleshanaku bereits sehr bekannt und wurde vielfach ausgezeichnet. Bücher von ihr gibt es aber auch auf Spanisch, Polnisch, Italienisch, Französisch, Slowakisch und Deutsch. Den ersten deutschsprachigen Band brachte vor 12 Jahren, im Jahr 2010, die Edition Korrespondenzen in Wien heraus. Reto Ziegler trat damals mit der wunderbaren Anfrage an mich heran, ob ich ihren damals jüngsten Band Smith Natures, Kinder der Natur, ins Deutsche übertragen würde. So ein Glück ist selten. Genau diese Dichterin hatte ich mir doch schon seit langem gewünscht, übersetzen zu dürfen. Seither folgten eine Reihe von Auszeichnungen für Luljeta Lleshanaku und 3 weitere Gedichtbände auf Albanisch. Homo Antarcticus, Negativräume und sozusagen gestern, Botsuethetje. Heute stellen wir Ihnen den zweiten auf Deutsch erschienenen Band der Autorin vor, wie Holger Pils schon sagte. Der trägt den schönen Titel Die Stadt der Äpfel. Dieser Band ist eine Sammlung von Gedichten aus einem Zeitraum von 20 Jahren. Die sind zwischen dem Jahr 2000 und dem Jahr 2020 geschrieben worden. Luljeta mund na lexosh poezine par lutem.
Atëherë është pjesa e parë e poezisë Hapësira negative. Hapësira negative. Pjesa e dytë. Viti 1968. Në port, anijet që vinin nga lindja shkarkonin tas të shpuar me oris, minj dhe delirin e revolucionit kultural. Disa burra me uniform në mes të natës bastisën kishën. Vendasit e panë priftin e tyre me benevrek të dridhe për të ftohtit në borë dhe pyeten me sy njëri tjetrin të zhgënjur. Ky është ai që na ka falur mëkatet? Para syve tyre u dogjen ikonat dhe librat e shenjtë. Dëshmitarët u sëmbrapsën dhe më, si të ishin letra dashurie, askush nuk u doli zot. Nga varret u shkullën kryqet dhe nga gjuha betimet e pakthyeshme. Kodra dheu që shira do t'i rrafshoni herët avon. Fëmijët rishin për gjuhë e këmbanat, si su kishte shkuar mendja më parë. Brenda një nate, ku pola u shemb dhe papritur zbuloi, një mori yjesh pa emër, të cilët ju vun pas, si mizat pas një kali të ngontur. Po e diela e meshës me se të mbushej. Gratë vinin kazanët në borë dhe burrat mbushnin lullat. Kundër gravitetit, tymi ngjitej lart. Kurse gozhdet në këpus të grisura zbulonin stigmate që pikonin në vendet gabuara, kodin e ri të shtrejtërimit të njeriut nga njeriu.
Was wir jetzt gerade gehört haben zur Eröffnung dieses Abends, ist ein Teil aus dem Zyklus Negativräume. Und ich möchte jetzt auch noch dazu sagen, wir werden dieses Gespräch, diese Lesung auf Deutsch, Albanisch und Englisch führen. Ich werde mit Luljeta dann auf Englisch sprechen, sodass wir alle das verstehen können. Und ich lese jetzt die Übersetzung dieses Textes. Negativräume 2. Das Jahr 1968. Im Hafen luden Schiffe aus dem Osten zerrissene Säcke ab. Reis, Mäuse und das Delirium der Kulturrevolution. Einige Männer in Uniform stürmten die Kirche mitten in der Nacht. Die Anrainer sahen ihren Priester in Unterhosen im Hof, vor Kälte zitternd, und fragten einander enttäuscht: Der hat uns die Sünden vergeben? Vor ihren Augen verbrannten Ikonen und heilige Bücher. Die Zeugen traten noch weiter zurück. Als seien es Liebesbriefe, wollte keiner etwas damit zu tun haben. Aus den Gräbern riss man die Kreuze, aus den Mündern sabberten unwiderrufliche Schwüre. Erdhaufen, die der Regen früher oder später wegschwemmen würde. Kinder zogen Glocken an den Klöppeln hinter sich her. Dass wir nicht früher darauf gekommen sind. Innerhalb einer Nacht wurde die Kuppel zertrümmert und sofort erschien eine Unzahl namenloser Sterne. Wir taufen sie später, wie Fliegen auf einem toten Pferd. Aber was würde die Sonntagsmesse ersetzen? Die Frauen stellten Kochtöpfe in den Garten, die Männer stopften sich ihre Pfeifen, der Rauch trotzte der Gravitation, während Nägel in kaputten Schuhen an den falschen Stellen Stigmata hervorbrachten. Ein neuer Code der Heiligsprechung, von Mensch zu Mensch. Das nächste Gedicht, das wir ausgesucht haben, stammt aus dem Zyklus Wasser und Kohlenstoff. Luljeta Lleshanaku Filimin.
Ujde karbon, trupi klan balt, trupi të tradhon. Trupi është thjesht karbon dhe ujë. Isha 17 vjeç kur një mëngjes në qeli, pas një nate klapie me 41 gradë temperaturë, bronkopneumoni, u gdhivan mes të pellgut tim të urinës. Nuk isha më as burre as fëmijë. Pastaj në kampin e punës në Kabinett, tash teologun të mblitën duqet e kalburat cigares, për një thithur të vetëm, apo sapo të marre. Ju mund vazhdoni.
Der Körper lässt dich im Stich, der Verräter. Der Körper ist nur Wasser und Kohlenstoff. Ich war 17, als ich eines Morgens in meiner Zelle erwachte, nach einer Nacht im Delirium, 40 Grad Fieber, Lungenentzündung, feucht vom eigenen Urin, weder Kind noch Mann. Dann im Arbeitslager draußen im Sumpf sah ich den Theologen, wie er vergammelte Zigarettenstummel aufsammelte. Für einen einzigen Zug oder um sie sich wenigstens unter die Nase zu halten. Als ich den ehemaligen Sorbonne-Professor beobachtete, wie er heimlich in Abfällen wühlte, bis er die Schale einer Wassermelone fand, er wischte sie an der Hose ab und verschlang sie ohne zu kauen. Da wurde ich Zeuge der Auslöschung von 5000 Jahren Zivilisation innerhalb einer Minute. Der erhängte Körper dieses alten Mannes besaß so viel Würde, die ihm auf Erden wie im Himmel verweigert blieb. Barfuß wie ein Heiliger, sein Kopf ein kalter Planet, in der letzten Umdrehung um sich selbst, zur Seite gedreht, als ob er das eigene Sterben nicht sehen wollte. Aber damit war es nicht genug. Sie rissen ihm die Goldzähne aus mit einer Brutalität, als wollten sie 3 Generationen entfernen. Auch als Toter wirst du noch deklassiert. Wie kann sich ein zahnloser Mann vor dem letzten Gericht verteidigen? Wie soll er seine Argumente formulieren? Die Toten werden lachen. Die Engel werden sich den Bauch halten. So wird auch er vergessen werden. Einfach Wasser und Kohlenstoff, wie alle anderen. Die Lebenden gingen wieder ihrer Arbeit nach mit hängenden Köpfen, als wären sie auf ihrem eigenen Begräbnis. Peitschen knallten auf ihre Hüften und Knöchel, ließen ihnen keine Zeit weiter nachzudenken, nicht der Letzte in der Reihe sein. Darum ging es, von morgens bis abends. Doch wo war unser Land in dem Moment? Wo war Caesar? These were the first 3 poems that we selected to read today. Now, if we want to talk a bit about these 2 poems, Luljeta, to make them maybe accessible to the audience, although they are by themselves already very accessible. 2 recurring topics in your work are also appearing in these 3 poems that we just read. And in my view, these are religion and its prohibition during communist dictatorship in Albania, and what happened to imprisoned persons under the hoher regime. So if we want to start with religion, you did not grow up as a religious person, or did you? You once told me years ago that you are Muslim. However, in your poems, I read a lot about Christian traditions, stories from the Bible and so on. So I'm just curious how you see this in your life, or how you see these stories, these topics. Do you see this as a European inheritance or a cultural inheritance? So I'm really interested, why do you focus on religion?
Well, the part of the poem of Negative Space we just read is exactly about the cultural revolution in Albania, when all the religious institutions were dismissed, and Albania was one of the rare, or probably the only one, atheistic country in the world. So I'm growing up, I'm born on exactly the time, on 68, at the time of Cultural Revolution. And I am growing up without any religious education at all. And even the parents even didn't dare to talk about that. After the regime collapsed, I was capable for the first time to get in touch with religious literature, and I was amazed. It was a Bible, the first religious book I read. It was the Old Testament, and I went on reading and reading and reading again, and feeling sorry for myself, and probably even blaming my mother why she never taught me about that. So it's like another dimension was added to my life. But then after Bible, Old and New Testament, I started to read Quran. And why all these religious heritage is so important for me as person, and especially as a poet, is that it's unique. It's everything there. It's history, it's sociology, it's philosophy, it's psychology, it's everything there. It's the perfect text. So, you know, it's like if you can survive with food only, it's the same about literature. You can survive with reading Bible only. And let's say, it brought a new, it extended the dimensions of my creativity too, because you can find in Bible, in religious literature, all the cliche forms of human behavior. So it's like you have the formula of how the human society works. But both poems, Negative Space and Water and Carbon, that you just read, parts of them, are probably my two poems who are directly about communists, because the rest of the poems have another approach, are indirect or just touch some elements, but these ones are directly about that period. So 30 years after the collapse of the regime, you can make the question, does it make any sense to talk about that? Especially when you have to do with a generation who are supposed to be my readers, who know little or know nothing about communists. And the publishers, I remember some, a foreign publisher in a literature event who said that enough with communism, but especially the Western countries who, for the Western publishers, the communist history remains kind of exotic, so they don't know much about that. The question is that, is that a choice or not? Is that my choice to talk about communism or not? The thing is that my generation is shaped, is stamped with that part of the history. So when the regime collapsed, I was 23 years old already, you know, created as personality. And going back, I feel that when I go back to my childhood house, to my childhood town, I can say that is that a very powerful emotional shock, which is not that kind of nostalgia that everybody has about childhood, but is something more. So that house carries much more history, you know, or my life carries more history than a human life is supposed to carry. So it's everything there, is internment, is imprisonment, is then exodus on 91. It's too much history, too much sufferings, you know, happening there. So it's not only about, it's not childhood, it's much more than that. So I think I don't have a choice to write or to write about that, but my approach, I think, it's or what I try for is to have a kind of a different approach, not to treat that period as a historical fact or political experience only, but as an interpretation of human nature. Because in my opinion, politics is never a cause, but a consequence that creates new causes and new consequences itself. It can exploit our strength as well as our weaknesses, and a crisis and moments of depression and let's say historical unpleasures are the method that politics use, to lead to such a deviation of history like dictatorships are, or like Nazi was, or anything that is a regression in history. So these poems are written in a time distance from, so let's say, 30 years, because I needed some time to chew, to consume, and to analyze, and to keep the very important emotional distance from the fact. Because I don't think that the readers are interested to hear what I felt, but the readers might be interested to hear how it works, what was in essence, living in such a regime, in totalitarian regime.
Mm-hmm. And Luljeta, when you talk about your childhood home, just to put it in a geographical place, you would talk about the time when you lived in Kruja.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, so maybe to explain that a bit to the audience, geographically, Kruja is about 40-50 kilometers distant from Tirana, which was...
Tirana. Yeah, you already know that. It's a town, it's a historical town with a middle-age castle that represents the resistance of feudal Prince Skanderbeg against the Ottoman invasion.
But it's a regional castle. It was the original castle, but there is also the castle that was rebuilt that was built from scratch, or it was rebuilt during the...
Yeah, which is a surrogate thing, indeed. Was rebuilt from, I think, around 40 years ago, that tried to keep the authenticity it had, but it's the name of Skanderbeg which makes it, the town and the castle, one of the attraction touristic sites, And, I mean, if you visit Albania, you can't avoid visiting Kruja. And another thing is that geographical position, which is it's fantastic, it's great. The town is set on the mountain, on the side of the mountain, and look at the sea. So that kind of balcony, that looking from above, and the seasons, which were beautiful, spring and summer, snow, winter, probably kind of influence my my early inspiration and approach to poetry. And another thing is that towns itself, I mean, small cities are always provocative, because the life looks so codified and simple there. Everybody knows everybody. So those little stories make the life of the town, and characters that I describe in another poem that you are going to read later, is that the children of morality. So it's like a stage, a theater stage, with its small dramas which become that get bigger and bigger, circulating from one mouth to another, with its let's say heroes and let's say negative characters, and you can get I mean, they have kind of identity that you can't find in the big cities.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the way you describe it actually reminds me a bit my hometown where I grew up, which is so beautiful in the middle of Austria, and which me as a child didn't always feel that way because you felt so observed. Everyone knew everything, as you put it. And I think this is one of the great quality of your poems, that actually, in my view, when I read them, they don't, of course, I know from you, because I know you and your story, I know that they take place in Albania, or they are inspired partly by the life in Albania, but they could take place everywhere. They have a very deep human essence about them, that everyone, I think, can find herself or himself, themselves. Does this come natural to you? Is it your way of life? Or do you really think about it, that you say, I want to write poems which are for everyone, not only people who know about Albania?
No, I mean, the more you try to control your writing process, less you control it. So I don't pretend I have control about my poems. It's always a spontaneous fact that provokes a poetical idea, something that can generate in a bigger context. And it's funny that several people think that I was growing up in a village, and because probably the most dominant images of my poems are those of deep villages in Albania. I know I lived for a while there, but it's not that. The thing is that what I try to do is creating a unique cosmos, village, why not, but something which is unique itself. So it's a part of process, creating that with some elements that are preserved in my memory. But it's not my goal. Even I can't do that. I can't manage that to try to make my poem necessarily universal. But I think if the poems pass through this analytic process, what remains at the end of process is something universal. So it comes, it depends on the deepness on the depth of the poem. So am I capable to make that which is my biographical, element, the history of something like that, to be perceivable, readable, and understandable in other countries, languages, cultures, backgrounds. So it's all about the time you give to yourself to go deep and deep to the essence of the things, and the essence is common everywhere and for everybody.
Luljeta, shall we read some other poems? And I would like to continue with Gruaja dhe Gjirafat. Ndoshta këtu do ishte bukur nëse do të lexoje ti pastaj pjesën e dytë nga peizazhi. Unë filloj në gjermanisht e ti do lexosh pastaj.
Okay.
Die Frau und die Giraffen. Die Frau glaubt, einst war sie Teil einer Giraffenfamilie. Ihre warme Haut frittierte die Luft, Bratpfannen gleich. Die Kraft der Giraffen steckt im Hals, lang, muskulös. Auch ihre Qual liegt am Hals. Das fortwährende Hinunterbeugen zu den kurzen tropischen Hölzern der Savanne. Eines Tages wurde die Landschaft ausradiert. Die Köpfe, die zarten Knie, der gefleckte Rücken. Nur die Hälse blieben, der gebogene Hals der Giraffe, verloren, mitten auf dem weißen Blatt. Eine der beweglichen Leitern auf dem Flughafen. Sie wird langsam über die nasse Piste gezogen, wenn das Flugzeug abgehoben hat.
Peisazhi u fshin një ditë, u fshin kokat, gjunjë delikat, kurrizet pullalie, mbetën vetëm qafat, qafa e pjerrët e gjirafës, e hutuar midis fletës bardh, si shkallë lëvizë aeroportesh që tërhiqet ngathet mbi pistën e lagësht pas ikjes së avionit.
Sie hörten jetzt den zweiten Teil, die zweite Strophe des Gedichts auf Albanisch. And as the next poem, I'm going to read Children of Morality. You spoke about it before. Kinder der Moral. Die Europäer lehrten den autochthonen Einwohnern die Scham. Das begann mit dem Bedecken der Geschlechtsteile. Andere Zivilisationen hatten mehr Glück. Sie bekamen die Moral ready to wear, von oben in Steinplatten geritzt. Dort, wo ich aufgewachsen bin, hatte die Moral eine Form, Körper, Namen. Kain, Maria Magdalena, Ruth, Dalila, Rachel. Jedes 7-jährige Kind kann mit tintenbeflecktem Finger auf perfide Beispiele von Laster oder Tugend deuten, dort, wo die Zeit ihre Eier in einen Morast legt. Also habe ich die ersten Lektionen in Morallehre eingenommen, ohne zu kauen, wie Hustensaft. Alles andere war abstrakter und geschah unter einem keuschen Dach. Auch die nächste Generation enttäuschte nicht. Noch ein Kain, noch eine Ruth, noch eine Maria Magdalena. Sie wurden nie erwachsen. Klischees sind Gefahr und Schutz zugleich, trockener Schnee für die Iglus der Eskimos. Jetzt weiß ich mehr über Moral, könnte sogar als Moralistin gelten, mit dem Zeigefinger als rhetorischem Mittel. Doch wo sind meine Anhaltspunkte? Eine Tür ging zufällig auf, Licht drang ein, löschte die Porträts auf Silberbromid. Einst waren das Menschen aus Fleisch und Blut. Als nächstes Gedicht für diesen Part haben wir das Titelgedicht ausgewählt des Bands, Die Stadt der Äpfel, Qyteti Molleve. Lulim mbase ke qef të lexosh disa vargje në shqip.
Qyteti i mollëve. Hija e gruas shtatzon një varg kodrinësh në horizont. Për muaj me radhë ajo e mbajti të fshet shtatzanin. Në të njëjtën mënyrë si fëmijët e eksodit fshehin lodrat e preferuara midis trikove të lehta dhe bukës, kur u është kërkuar të mos marrin asgjë veç rrobave në trup.
Die Stadt der Äpfel. Die Kontur einer schwangeren Frau. Eine Reihe Hügel am Horizont. Mehrere Monate lang verbarg sie ihre Schwangerschaft, wie die Kinder des Exodus ihr Lieblingsspielzeug, unter Brot und Wollpullovern, als man ihnen befahl, nur die Kleider am Leib mitzunehmen. Aus dem Nichts materialisiert sich ein Zigeuner mit seinem kleinen Sohn, baut sich vor ihr auf. In seinen Händen entfaltet eine Ziehharmonika ihre Flügel, entblößt die gebauschte weiße Brust. Ein Adler über dem Beutetier. Ein Apfel liegt auf dem Kopf des Kindes, wie auf den Köpfen aller Kinder der Stadt. Halb verfaulte Äpfel warten auf den Vaterschaftstest. Und die Väter werden schwach, bevor sie ihren Pfeil abschießen. Alle wachsen und welken gleichzeitig, vom selben Gärtner gestutzt. Leute mittleren Alters gibt es nicht. Sie emigrieren und wenn sie zurückkehren, haben sie graue Haare und bauen ein großes graues Haus, in dem sie ihren Atem aushauchen. Der Winter aber ist immer ein guter Apfelwinter. Äpfel überall, Äpfel erinnern sich an nichts. Und doch, wie in der Genesis, spielen sie ihr Spiel der Versuchung, hier, wo es kein Paradies zu verlieren gibt. Gleichgültig öffnen Frauen ihre Fenster, lassen die Nacht von der Leine wie einen Hund. Auf der Straße riecht es nach fauligen Äpfeln oder Zedern. Here we have another set of motifs of your poems. First, to go back to the poem Giraffe, it creates a very special atmosphere. In a few lines, you tell, in my mind, the story of Albania, the story of a woman who dissolves into her surroundings, and also the story of a landscape that is used and exploited, let's say, erased. Does what I say have anything to do with what you had in mind when you wrote it?
Yeah, the second poem, I'm not supposed to say that, but the city of apples, it's about immigration. It's a process that it's dramatic during the last 3 decades, even at the moment we're talking about. So our men, husbands who leave their wives back and children, and going in the world to make money and hoping that one day you will be capable to come back and build a house in their city, in their town, and take care for their families and die there. So this is the dream of every immigrant, since the immigration started in the world. But this is typical of post-communist Albania, and it used to be before too. It's a poor country, and it used to be. So this myth of it's a reality where that when male fail their masculinity test, they are not capable to keep to take care and to keep their families. So but the thing is that it looks that it has to do with the past, but this is one of my tactics that I always try to make the reality kind of, I don't define where and when. It's like asking for the right distance, which makes me more free indeed from the fact. It's like watching a picture. You always have to take some steps back to find the perfect angle, to take the whole frame and to enjoy that. So even it looks undefined here and there, and even probably the idea looks not clear at all. That's the start. That's what I have in my mind writing that. And about women and giraffes, it's about women in Albania, women I know. So
ask you about this, the Wilhelm Tell image, as we are in front of a German audience. So I think people would think of this. So would you say for you, these fathers shooting the arrow, they are the fathers who go into emigration in order
exactly to... So they don't they fail that test, that fatherhood test. That's it,
Yeah.
But I mean, talking about immigration from such an angle, but when I find it's very interesting talking about women in communism in general, because from outside, from the Western countries, for decades it was perceived that women in socialist countries were more fulfilled, were more free, were more happy. Indeed, it's more about, it comes from the propaganda more, because people who lived under that regime know better that socialism didn't, provided some rights for women they didn't have before. Massive employment and education and voting and something like that. But the thing is that it was a kind of reform which was done from above. And everything which is done from above can't be successful. Why? Because at first you have to change the mentality, the patriarchal mentality which existed in the country until then. So it's a process which takes time. So you can't change the relationship between woman and wife in family with legislation, and some governmental measures and something like that. So, and considering the hard work and employment, job was an obligation for women because they were needed to construct socialism. So you didn't have choice. So you had the right to work, but more than a right, it was an obligation. And even doing hard work, harder than you can, which went against the female nature. And so even job was not a pleasure anymore. So what we have in socialist society is that women, from having one, were only, let's say, double burdened, So she had to work for the government, public work during the day, and the rest of the day she had to wash, to clean, to cook, to take care of her children. And considering especially the poverty and then the poor conditions of living, life became really hell for women. I remember my mother, she looked, I remember her old all the time. I don't remember her face young because she was overexhausted. And she was one of those women one of those rare women who did a divorce that time, because divorce was not a tradition at all. So they ask me everywhere that why you, Luljeta, don't talk about feminism in your poems. And my response is always the same, because I live in a country where freedom was the main issue, and talking about gender issues, and it was something not important at all. And probably I wanted somebody to take care of my mother, even her lord, somebody who would play the classic role of husband and man. So it's difficult to talk about this, feminism and women emancipation, as they call that, because they were afraid of using liberalism, in a socialist society. But in my life, and you could find in some other poems, there were women, real, heroic women, I would say, who were the object of my inspiration. And they were women who worked hard, raised children alone, women who were deported and probably and internated then, women who took care for family and even took care for their husbands in prison. So it exceeded the role of the women. Were they women anymore? This is the question. So it's not about, it's not about women rights anymore. It's everybody was in a horrible position in communism, and it was so difficult even to women look like men, and men look like women. It's like we find that kind of masculization of women and weakness on men, let's say. So that's what brought socialism in Albania.
You can find the female strength, I think in your poems. I feel that very strongly, even if you don't speak about it explicitly, about feminism. To me, still, these many poems radiate this strength, and that you feel that society then and now rests on women, and without them everything would crumble. This is the feeling I get from your
may I add something
yes?
Just came to my mind. It's a personal thing. Since I was a child, I was told from my mother that as a child of enemy, because my family was considered enemy for the regime, and I was a child of enemy, I could not have a future. It's like I could not study university, I couldn't have a profession, I couldn't have a career. So I was not allowed to be happy. So, but this is the last thing that a child wants to hear, but she did it, and I did not commit suicide, as you see. So she was a pragmatic person. I mean, she just prepared me to suffer, and at the time, I almost hated her, for this thing. But many years after, I appreciated this tough gesture, because instead of killing me, it just made me stronger to face what was prepared, for me in the future. And you can't imagine how a mother or father can say to his child who is 6 years old that, look, you don't have a future. That is waiting for you,
Luljeta, you wanted to say something about the giraffe before a few minutes ago. Do you think we covered that already, or would you like to say something more about the giraffe?
I could see that in the women of my family, that pride, which probably kind of moved them out from their female identity. But pride it's pride, that's what it's just based on some, as I told you, in my personal experience, it's about pride. Yeah. Pride.
And there is also this aspect of nature. Did you think of how nature in Albania changed since the 90s when you wrote the poem, or is it something that is my own interpretation?
Well, except all the climate problems, which are global now, and warming and other stuff, it's like it's mismanaging or bad managing of the nature, and all these constructions without any sense at all. Just we inherited a very damaged, nature from the communist regime. It was a crazy regime, because they cut forests for producing wheat, can you imagine that? Because it was the only reason, it was that propaganda that we can be an independent country. So we inherited a very damaged country. But instead of, let's say, recuperating as much as possible the damage, the post-communist period was even a bigger damage. So what you find now in Albania, it's only concrete and high buildings, and you don't find any authentic heritage at all. Everything is going under construction. And under destruction and construction, because construction and destruction are the same thing, here. So it's like, that's why my connection with nature in general, it's weak. It's really very weak. It looks like a urban, poetry. And it's not a preference more, but of course, if you are not in touch with that, you can't improvise artificially something that goes beyond your senses and your experience. And
you are more a city person than a nature person. Although maybe we would think, if we live, for example, in Vienna, Frankfurt, or Berlin, we would think of Albania as this green country with mountains and nature, but you don't feel yourself, as you said, someone that is very much connected to nature.
And for another reason too, because time to time I can spend some time in some rural, mostly in art residencies, beautiful landscapes. But I always kind of avoided a kind of romanticization of my poetry. Since my approach, since my, let's say, my goal is bringing human natures, I think that urban area and experience and characters, I bring a lot of characters, you know, in my poems. So I'm for something more muscular, let's say, something more engaged poetry. So you can say that, except that limited contact with nature, it's an intentional choice to be kind of more aggressive in my poetry and more direct.
Mm-hmm. With the next set of poems that we are going to read, we nevertheless go into the extreme of nature. We go to Antarctica. So we read a piece of the cycle Homo Antarcticus, the 12th part. Would you again like to start with a few lines in Albanian, Luljeta, please?
Homo Antarcticus, pjesa e 12. Me shtetësinë tonë luanin peshqit në oqean. Në miljen e 7 lam rrugës dhe gradat, klasat, bashkë me qenë, patatit dhe aparatin fotografik. Me kartmonetat ndezëm zjarrin dhe mbajtëm vetëm nga një paun metalik për njeri, për t'ua bërë klet antropologëve gjetjen tonë pas 200 vjetësh.
Im Ozean spielten die Fische mit unserer Staatsbürgerschaft. Ab der 7. Meile ließen wir unsere Medaillen, unsere Ränke zusammen mit den Hunden, den Erdäpfeln und dem Fotoapparat zurück. Mit dem Papiergeld entfachten wir ein Feuer. Jeder behielt nur eine Münze, damit uns die Archäologen später leichter fänden. Auf der Elefanteninsel mussten wir uns auch vom Tabak verabschieden und der Erinnerung an kleine Dorfstraßen und das Heimkommen nach Mitternacht. Die Zeit glitt über uns hinweg, ohne uns auch nur ein Haar zu krümmen. Als wären wir antike Siedlungen, exponierte feierlich unsere weißen Knochen. Auf den Mauern saßen die abwesenden Grillen. Da verließen uns auch die 10 Gebote. Nicht stehlen, nicht lügen, nicht begehren deines Nächsten Gut, deine Eltern ehren. Nur eins ist uns vielleicht geblieben, das mit der Heiligkeit des Sonntags. Wir hatten nichts, wir gehörten niemandem. Eine ganz neue Art war entstanden, Homo Antarcticus, der wissenschaftliche Beweis dafür, dass Vergessen und frei ein und dasselbe sind. Maybe I feel now it would be good to speak directly a bit about Homo Antarcticus, because this is such an important cycle in this collection. It's 19 pages long, and it is, I think, quite different from your earlier poems. How did you decide to write about the story of Frank Wild, this explorer of the wild seas and the ice? Or was he maybe not a voluntary explorer? Was he obliged to do it? Is he an emigrant before modern times? Before the 21st century?
Well, this is my my favorite poem. I mean, I think this is the best thing I ever wrote, and probably I'm wrong, but I'm still I still love this poem, and indeed that I was I am very I am very curious and very interested about all these explorations, stories, and especially during explorations of poles, south and north, because of their heroic dimension. I mean, my interest is not about scientific more than human. And one of them, probably the most popular of them, is the story of Shackleton, in South Pole, which was a research expedition, which was very unfortunate that they failed with that. But then this scientific mission was changed in humanitarian and leadership mission. And Shackleton, as figure, is its personality and tactic and everything is studied in all the political schools in all around the world about the role of leadership and model of leadership and so on. So I heard and read, but I couldn't, I needed time to explain myself why I was so fond on this story, why I was so related to that. And indeed, it's during that, this story deals with the metamorphosis that the individual undergoes when accidentally detached from civilization. The story happened on 1914 and became one, as I told you, one of the most famous survival stories in history, by surviving the sense of the story. And it sounds like a natural experiment with a human being in a way to reflect, on the body's relationship with the reason, relationship of the past with the present, relationship of the ego with self, Daniel, of life with death, and especially as a reflection on modern civilization, which means that the pressure of the modern society, of society on individual in our time, trying to arguing, among the other things, the role of social status on the restriction of the freedom, So what was the experiment? The experiment was taking a group of men from the modern time in nowhere, taking them in nowhere, somewhere taking them in primitive time, let's say, living primitive way, and then the contrast, and let's say drama starts when they survive, but come back to civilization, but they can't survive the civilization. So they survive the ice and nothingness and lack of hope there, but they couldn't survive the civilization or the normal life. So here starts the idea of the poem. So what's wrong with modern civilization? Is that giving us or taking us, more? So what's the point? What's wrong with that? So every part of the poem serves as an argument, to interpret what aspect, of human civilization, of communication, of modern personality, of modern needs. So, and every aspect, all of these aspects, which I intentionally, let's say, put under the skin of Frank Wilde, which is not the protagonist, it's not Shackleton, but he's the second in command, and very private person, but very brave and loyal, because in our time, even loyalty is not a quality anymore. So I talk even about that, what it means to be to accept to be the second in command and to be loyal and to be ready to sacrifice your life for your friend and for the others. So these are qualities that nobody discuss about. It's not a quality at all. So as the character of Frank Wilde, I mixed a lot of things. And I chose Frank Wilde even for another reason, because Shackleton is already defined, you know. He has his status, his character, and is described in many books are written about him. Everybody knows everything, but choosing another character which is in shadow, let's say, I was free to recreate him in my way, referring to those few details I could read from the diaries, from the exhibitions and the impressions and other.
How did you get to know him? How did you come across this story?
I watch a lot of, I'm very interested about documentary movies, which are history especially, or science. So for the first time, I get in touch with this story through a documentary, and then I could see that there were a lot of movies, even artistic movies produced about that, and books. So this was the first contact, the documentary movie. And it's a beautiful movie from BBC, documentary movie. It's a long
one. You spoke about what is underlying maybe civilization, or in how far civilization could be threatened. And now while you were talking, it struck me how this Homo and Articus poem that was written years before, now in my mind, after the 2 last years that we all experienced on this earth, how this seems in a way connected to your very last poem, Urbi et Orbi, that is also at the end of the book, where you describe a threat to civilization, but a totally different threat. A very, very tiny threat in form of a virus. So I think it would be nice to end our reading this evening's performance with this poem, with some parts of the poem Urbi et Orbi. But let's maybe, before we start, talk a little bit about it, just very, very briefly, because you wrote this poem Urbi and Orbi in March 2020, and I happen to know this very well because I think it's the only poem that I really experienced in the making, although in the distance, because at the time you wrote it, we were communicating and corresponding very regularly for another project that should have taken place in Berlin at that time, for a poetry festival where we would have been both invited, but then it was decided, of course, because of the pandemic, that we had to do it remotely, and we had to do it as a correspondence. And at that time, the correspondence to me in this time was also in a way consoling, because we were suddenly so close, because we were in the same situation. So what I wanted to say is that when you wrote the poem, you probably didn't think, neither did I myself, that we would still be talking remotely two years later.
Yeah. Indeed, probably this is the only poem that I have published, which I still consider not finished. And even after 2 years, the COVID pandemic situation is still actual. And this is the reason I couldn't be physically in Munich for this presentation. But the dynamic of the situation is still changing. So if I would rewrite this poem, of course, and I think I have to rewrite it in the future, and there are a lot of things will be changed and added. And so what what changed, because the connection you did with Homo Antarcticus, it's a good one indeed. What changed the pandemic situation? It's like, at first managing such a situation as a statement, for example, it's not a position I would envy. It's so complicated because you lose some human rights. You know, we see protests everywhere, and it's so difficult to give these human rights back. It's a slow process. I mean, the regime can change in 24 hours. The economy also has its ups and downs. But if you make some steps back, you know, allow that to happen in the human beings, is so difficult, you know, to regain them back. So that's why, and I explain very well, the resistance of, let's say, many groups to, I mean, against all these limitations and like vaccination as obligation and things like that. But on the other side, also, you have to respect the right of the others to live. So you are responsible to protect the others' life. So that's why I said it's so confusing and so difficult to decide, you know, about what to do and what not to do. But from another perspective, that what kind of shake it brought to people everywhere in the world, it's like I could consider that, I could compare that with a process of stocking in traffic, you know. It's like stopping traffic, stuck in traffic. Yes, that's the right word. When you stop looking forward, but from this moment, you start to reconsider your positions and you start to look aside you. And that's why this period of isolation and kind of paralysis, let's say, encouraged everybody of us to stop and reflecting. Everybody reflected in his own way. You know, people reflect about what I'm doing, what's the purpose of my life, which is an existential question, about all these, let's say, let's say, features of modernity. For example, what I revealed during this, let's say, lockdown, there were those 3 months, terrible months, is that I started to clean my shelves, you know, and I threw. And then I became sad. I said that, God, why I needed all this stuff, which can be, you know, clothes, paper, electric and electronic, you know, stuff. And I reflected about consumerism, which is really a big problem in our time. And it's like, I felt sad because I was thinking that how many hours and time I invested in such stuff, which look, were they so important, you know, when I could use this time and energy for something else, which probably could make me happier. But it's easy to say, to make this question, but it's difficult to decide, because you are a social person. I mean, you are a social being, and you want to be accepted everywhere, and it's so difficult to be detached or to avoid all this sense of consumerism, which now is a problem all around the world. This is one of the things. So it's always, it's not only the time of reflection, but each time we are exposed in the face of death, it's that reflection, you know, process. It's like showing, it's like being exposed to the mirror that shows all your real face and lines and everything that you try to avoid in normal circumstances.
Or being exposed to your computer's camera and look at yourself
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Luljeta, I'm very glad that we published your last poem before you could throw it away. And in my humble view as your translator, I would say it is completed. You don't need to change it. But if you want to write a second one, please go ahead. So I would like to end this conversation and reading by reading a part of Urbi et Orbi, which is the last cycle of poems in Die Stadt der Äpfel. And at the very end, I would like to ask you if you would read your poem Vertical Realities.
Yes. Yes.
Urbi et Orbi 3. Wie ein Krieg, aber nichts davon ist wie im Krieg. Weder der Ärger, noch die Opfer, noch der Ruhm. Noch wie enttäuscht wir von denen sein werden, die morgen die Früchte ernten. Versteckt hinter Mauern, Vorhängen, Leder, Gesichtsmaske höre ich mich atmen. Meine natürliche Wahrheit. Das Furchterregende, Unbekannte. Ein Teller mit Äpfeln, ein Messer, Verrat hängt in der Luft. Sehr wahrscheinlich wird einer der Mäntel, die im Korridor hängen, nie mehr getragen werden. Der Tod nimmt denselben Weg wie die Liebe. Ein Händedruck, eine Berührung, ein Flüstern ins Ohr, ein Seufzer. Wer von uns wird der Erste sein? Und wer von uns der Betrogene? Wenn du stirbst, fragen die Augen meiner Mutter. Wer wird mich dann versorgen? Sieben. Wenn dieser Albtraum zu Ende gegangen ist, werden wir zu den alten Schuhen, Farben, Gebräuchen zurückkehren und zu unserer Eitelkeit. Wir werden unsere Zähne anspitzen und Blumen zu den Gräbern tragen. Wir werden über Liebe und Politik sprechen, ein Glas Wein dazu trinken. Wir werden unsere Haut straffen und die depressiven Kilos verlieren. Wir werden vergessen. Das Vergessen ist unser einziger Talisman. Die Welt wird wieder dieselbe sein. Doch in der Zwischenzeit suchen wir verzweifelt nach einem Alibi für unsere Wiederauferstehung. Etwas Glaube, Moral, Sinn.
Realitet e vertikale. Vazhdimësia në rastin tim nuk është zgjedhje, por detyrim. Që kur tribreza zgjohë një herë azi brenda meje. I pari është një fëmijë i plakur, i matë. Fati me veshjet i zgjedh gjithmonë një numër më të vogël. Pastaj gjyshi. Në kohën e tij nuk njihe fjalë diagnozë. Ai thjesht vdiq nga dëshpërimi 6 muaj pas së shoqes. E pa humbur kohë mbi trupat e tyre, komuniteti ndërtoi një punishte uniforma zhdoku. E stërgjyshit, nëse ka ekzistuar një i tillë, unë nuk ja di as emrin. Këtu kujtesa pëson hiatus. Riardja fshatare e prerë si thojt e fort, e zverdur nga puna në arë. Të tre përkulen si një pyll si për meje. E më diktojnë se çfarë duhet bëj e çfarë nuk duhet. Sa po dëgjove për meje një tillë mirëmëngjes, si e dalë për një elefanti me putra mbi piano, apo për shqepjeve të gjaketës së timetit. Ata nuk porgatën të ndryshojnë nga gjë, e as të kundërlihen. Ndjen të freskët ashtu të lartë me sapunin e lirë për kosis. Thjesht e riprekin botën përmes meje, si me një palë doreza plastike për të ruajtur të pastër shkakun në vendin e krimit.
Vertikale Realitäten. Weitermachen ist Pflicht. Allmorgendlich schlagen 3 Generationen in mir die Augen auf. Der erste ist ein ältliches Kind, mein Vater. Er wählt sein Schicksal und seine Kleider immer eine Nummer zu klein. Dann der Großvater. Zu seiner Zeit gab es das Wort Diagnose nicht. Er starb schlicht an Verzweiflung, 6 Monate nach seiner Frau. Und ohne Zeit zu verlieren, wuchs auf ihren Körpern eine Fabrik, die Uniformen für Hafenarbeiter produzierte. Und der Urgroßvater, falls es einen gegeben hat. Ich kenne seinen Namen nicht. Hier hat meine Erinnerung ein Loch. Meine bäuerlichen Vorfahren sind abgeschnitten wie dicke, gelblich gewordene Nägel von Feldarbeitern. Alle 3 neigen sie sich über mich, wie ein Wald, und diktieren mir, was ich zu tun habe und was nicht. Du hast meinen Morgengruß gehört, wie einen stampfenden Elefanten auf einem Klavier oder die sich auflösenden Säume an der Jacke meines Vaters. Weder suchen sie Veränderung, noch würden sie sich dagegen wehren. Sie fühlen sich frisch, gewaschen mit der billigen Seife der Vergänglichkeit. Sie greifen einfach noch einmal nach der Welt, benützen mich wie ein paar Plastikhandschuhe, um am Tatort keine Spuren zu hinterlassen.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for everything, for your beautiful translation and this moderation and everything.
Fallen there to Luljeta.
For your deed.
Luljeta, for giving us the chance to meet you today in Munich, be it virtually, but more intensively. And thanks to Lyrik Kabinett for inviting us. And thanks to you for being with us and watching this. Vielen Dank. Schönen Abend.
Thank you.